Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this is, of course, No
No
Darkness
darkness but
But
ours.
Ours. So, this week, I believe we are talking about what we've decided to call found footage narrative tactics.
Yeah,
I yeah, and so essentially taking some of the strategies that you use when you make a found footage movie and applying them to literature.
yeah, which is kind of, I mean, in a way, it's it's kind of something coming full circle. Because I mean, one of the oldest kind of narrative things is to present the manuscript as a found narrative, like the manuscript found in a bottle by Poe. Oh, so
Yes,
many of M.R. following on from M.R. James, which our last couple of podcasts, so he went to great pains to present so many of his stories as if they were, actual, as if he was drawing on actual documents and actual events. Even I mean, in so many of his stuff, using his scholarly background to do that.
yeah, yeah. Either it would be like an anecdote that he had from a friend of his, and and he's recounting it, and the way that it was, the way that it was told to him. Um, the that classic kind of five guys hanging around in a in a gentleman's club somewhere, except without the hookers and blow,
Yeah,
and smoking cigars, and oh, I've got a ghost story, let me tell you about this, which then Susan Hill quite rightfully uses the crap out of in the woman in black, but yeah.
I mean, the stalls of Barchester is I mean, a perfect example. I mean, he says literally, well, I found this stuff. I found some of this stuff as I was going through some old documents in the college library, and you're piecing it together from, oh, here's this bit from the paper, and then here's so and so's diaries, and here's this
Oh
letter, and
yeah.
all of that.
Yeah, and what I love about that is that he ends up using beautifully the three things that I think inform found footage narrative, or an epistolary, not a narrative, a collage narrative, I've heard it called sometimes. But the three things that inform it best, which are the idea of presentation, how do you organize this stuff that you found to tell the story that is inherent in the material, and provenance, who organized the stuff. Did they leave out some stuff? Did they put some stuff in? Are they presenting it in a particular way? Could it be presented a different way? And of course, liminality, where you are literally inviting people to read between the lines and say, is there more to this? I'm getting an idea. Is that the idea I'm supposed to be getting? And it has this beautiful puzzle box kind of ring to it, and I mean, ever since I read Bram Stoker's Dr.
I was going
Acula,
to
as
say,
Ed Wood
there's
would
the
say.
classic example
Yeah.
of that large narrative. And some, it's not, and some of its documents. I mean, in Dr. Stewart's case, that's actually recorded medium. It's just his diaries in
Yes.
phonograph.
That's right. Yeah. It's like, again, going back to the idea that Dracula is a techno thriller. It's sort of like, we're going to have wax recordings, and we're going to, and Mina is going to transcribe stuff on a typewriter, you know,
And the journal's
and
kept in shorthand, and which totally perplexes Dracula when he
yeah,
says,
because
I
Dracula's never seen
I,
shorthand.
I
It's like,
did see
I can read English, but shorthand,
I,
what?
I did see a
What is
stage
this
play
about?
called Bats, which was basically a kind of very irreverent, anarchic spoof of Dracula, and setting up of a lot of it. But they had this whole thing where Jonathan and Mina, where Mina would start going on about about train timetables and which connection to get where, and basically turning herself and Jonathan on madly by
Yes.
doing so in the
Yeah.
process.
Yeah, exactly. Because, this is just Stoker's way of going, no, 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 this is happening right now. You could look up some train timetables right now.
And another element of it, of course, is verisimilitude, because I mean, you kind of have to do that extra bit of lifting with a narrative of the supernatural, because you're very much trying to get. You talk about liminality in the sense, that sense of a sort of a kind of a borderline thing. In a way, you're trying to kind of blur that kind of line between, is this fiction, or is this actually something that could, is this a fictionalized account, or is it an account of something that actually happened? And you get that kind of, and I remember years ago I got hold of a collection of Robert Westall's ghost stories, Antique Dust, and some prick, obviously very, very bitter and unhappy individual, had scribbled all these increasingly nasty penciled notes in the margins, ranging from the just, pettish and, old antique dealers are all scum, crooks, blah, 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 and Mars bars, horrid, rubbish, poison. Then one character talked about listening to Ella Fitzgerald, and there was horrid racial epithet squawks, at which point
God.
I really want to get... I'm glad. I hope this person is. I mean, it ended up becoming a novella called "Until My Darkness Goes," which is my first collection, inspired by this. Just imagining this horrible, baneful prick who'd written all this, kind of clinging on to existence through this book. But one of those really annoying, snarky comments that you get sometimes was in one of the stories. It's impossible to build tension in a first-person narrative. We know he survives, or he wouldn't be able to tell us the story. And it's like, hold my beer, I write horror.
Exactly.
It's entirely, but the found footage thing, or that found manuscript thing, you can actually, it's like you can have your cake and eat that. It's like, this person. You have all the immediacy of the first person narrative, but this person, you don't know this person survived. This could be, I mean, this is possibly taken to its the reductio ad absurdum in one of Lovecraft's revisions, The Diary of Alonzo Typer, which ends with, black paws materialize and being dragged towards the cellar.
Yes, and writing madly as I go. I mean, there basically, you're always stuck with the problem as a horror writer of, I have to tell you something that can't happen happened. I have to tell you a story where I begin by saying, okay, so this doesn't actually happen, but let's assume that it does. Particularly when you're talking about the supernatural. But even I've had people have their suspension of disbelief broken simply because it's like, now how could all these things happen to one person? And really the only I mean, my favorite example of that was a guy who left a bad review of experimental film and was sort of like, I just don't even understand how she could, be on all these painkillers and have this problem and that problem and all this insomnia and be so unhappy. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't know how she's managing to write a book at all. And I'm like, motherfucker.
I was going to say,
that was me.
I was going to say, this was, I mean, obviously I wanted to be, because we both kind of worked in this format ourselves in our own work, and it's something definitely want to talk about later. But were you ever tempted, just instead of to just go the whole hog and just call the character Gemma Files and just kind of blur that distinction, so that people would actually be thinking, hang on a minute, could this have actually been something that happened to her?
Well, I know you did that with Black Mountain to wonderful effect, but no, actually, I never was tempted to say that, it was something that happened to me, even though, I read Crash by J.G. Ballard a long time ago. I read it in university in one of those yellowback Faber and Faber copies, where they tell you absolutely nothing about the book. So I just opened it and started reading, and it was in the library, and I began laughing out loud, and eventually had to rent the book just so that I could leave. Because they wouldn't have let me stay. But yeah, you know, it's like Ballard is basically his own character. It's like, this is me, J.G. Ballard, writing about the time when I was fucking my wife, Mrs. Ballard. You know? And then I got in a terrible car crash and ended up fucking a whole bunch of other people, you know, and having sex with somebody's wound.
Apparently, one of the publisher's readers, when rejecting the manuscript, actually said, "This author is beyond psychiatric help. Do not publish."
Yes.
It's possibly the kind of.
So he is totally lying. He was never in a terrible car accident, you know. But then when you fold in the fact that J.G. Ballard is also essentially the same kid from Empire of the Sun. You know, it's like other people would be like, how could so many things have happened to one person?
Well, exactly. I think Joel Lane said basically J.G. Ballard, he's basically an alien visiting this planet, or at least that was the feel you get from it. I mean, I think somebody commented that his autobiography, Miracles of Life, which was towards the end of his life, not long after he'd been diagnosed, he'd received a terminal diagnosis, was, you know, sort of in many ways kind of humanized someone who'd often been seen as this very kind of cold, aloof kind of, you know, sort of surveying everything with this kind of frozen analytic stare that didn't actually admit any kind of normal emotional response. And I know he's got them, he just didn't write about them.
One of the great things that Christian Bale at 13 does while playing Jim Ballard in Empire of the Sun is he manages to get across that by the end of it, when his parents find him again in that refugee camp, he's sort of looking at them and he doesn't recognize them at all. And, you know, you see him sort of touching his mother's lipstick. And you can sort of see the wheels turning in his head like, yeah, it could be her. You know, what the hell? You know, it's better than staying here.
He isn't that little boy anymore. He's changed completely. But I mean, he's also,
and to some degree, he's like a sociopath. He's like a learned sociopath. You know.
I mean, he was always a weird, annoying shit even at the beginning. You know, and
that's certainly
weird,
true.
Annoying little shit myself. That, you know, I can relate.
Right back at you.
I can certainly see the influence there on Timothy Darbyshire. Is it Darbyshire in The Emperor's Old Bones?
Darbyshire.
Sorry.
I always see the re-youthified version of Tim as being like essentially a younger Christian Bale.
I can see that.
Yeah. Wearing like terrible 1970s clothes, big sideburns. Ellis, my dear. Yeah, whatever. Whatever, Taipan.
Yeah. I mean, we've got so there's that authorial kind of self-insertion, which is one way of kind of doing it. There's always that sort of, I mean, it is a way to help make what is on the surface of things an unbelievable narrative seem more believable, or seem more real.
Absolutely. And you know, the thing that I've learned more and more as I've gotten older as a writer is that it's not just the massive leaps that you take, the massive imaginative leaps. It's also laying in the grit that becomes the pearl, and the grit is stuff from your own life. The grit is stuff from always.
As with anything, I mean, it's one of the. I mean, characterization is so, and atmosphere particularly are so important in these things, because, you know, without it, and I think this can be especially true of, well, with horror, but with any kind of genre fiction that relies on, that has, you know, strongly established tropes, or motifs in it. You've got to kind of have those. If you don't have that character as, you know, strong sense of characterization, you don't have a strong atmosphere, then those tropes overwhelm it. It becomes all about the mechanics rather than an organic kind of piece of work.
So organically, who can you create with more knowledge than a character that is like you? It could be like you at a certain moment. It could be like you bedrock, like what you think of as, if you had to describe yourself to somebody, who are you? What are you? Things that run through my work. For example, there's a streak of perversity that connects Lois Cairns to to the ever popular Chess Parketer. Both of them are people whose response to why or why not would be, well, because fuck you, that's why.
Yeah.
And that is, to me, like a bedrock part of my personality, for better or worse. It's like I say less of that these days, and certainly less in person, but always there is like some part of me that's like, yeah, well, I know what you want me to do, but I'm just not going to do that. And those are characters that I'm attracted to, and therefore those are the characters that my work seems to revolve around. But sometimes it's also something as I hesitate to call it simple, because it's actually very, very detail oriented. But it's something as specific as, I'm going to sit down and I'm going to write down everything that I remember specifically about being a security guard, about having been a security guard for 3 years. I made 2 particular sites into the background of a story that I wrote.
Yeah.
At one point. And I made, when people say, where did the puppet motel come from? And I really have to, kind of smile and go, well, at one point I was managing 2 Airbnbs at the same time, one of which was really fucking creepy.
Yeah. A lot of it's just taking your own experience and just giving that little quarter turn to the left or the right to tip it over.
And it's useful to come out of a like a journalism background in that particular case for me.
I mean, one writer I know we both like a great deal is Graham Masterton, and he sort of said that anyone, as far as he was concerned, if anybody who wanted to be a writer, the best thing they could do would be to work as a journalist for a bit, because you get that very important work ethic where you have to, it's a job, you have to write you have to get up every morning and write, whether or not you feel like it, whether or not you feel inspired, whether or not you're hungover or whatever, and grind something out.
And you also have to listen to people, tell their own stories, and that teaches you that there are different people in the world. I mean, I think that was, that thing of theory of mind was harder for me to get than other people, but that's one of the biggest things that came out of my training as a journalist and my time as a journalist, was going, oh no, actually it's great to listen to other people.
Yeah.
It's kind of wonderful to listen to other people talk about their stuff and tell you things that you don't know. And, it teaches you that how people talk. It teaches you how to question them. It teaches you, what kind of questions to ask. There's like 3 different stories that I've written so far, maybe more, that are just interviews.
Wow.
Between 2 characters. So it's fascinating to me after the fact how much better my life became when I didn't have to worry about, letting people know that I was a weirdo. When the burden of the conversation being driven is not on you, then you don't have to worry about getting hyperfixated and starting to monologue about stuff that people don't give a shit about, which is pretty much anything that you're interested in. Instead, you can just be like, oh yeah, nice weather, absolutely. Yeah. Oh. So what's going on with you? Tell me more about that.
Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, you get something interesting out of it. Something. There's always something. And I think we're very quick to dismiss other people, definitely, but even to dismiss our own experiences as, inherently boring. That
Yes.
thing that I've often said about, oh, I don't want to write a fucking Oprah book about my life,
Yeah.
And yet, in some ways, experimental film turned out to be that Oprah book because it drew so heavily on personal experience, and the character was so patterned after myself.
What was your starting point with experimental film? Were you starting with the idea that this is kind of gonna be the closest I'm ever gonna get to writing an Oprah book, or did you start with something else and kind of did it develop into something?
Yeah, the latter, absolutely the latter. I had wanted to write something about a haunted film, and because that idea has always interested me, and I wanted to set something against the background of the Canadian film industry and the weirdness and, to be frank, the liminality of the Canadian film industry, because, I used to interview a lot of people who did experimental filmmaking. So much of the Canadian film industry is about, well, if you want to make a Hollywood film, go to fucking Hollywood.
Yeah.
We're not gonna give you money to make that. Yes. Because Canadian culture is about trying to distinguish yourself from the United States. In Quebec, they can make genre films, successful genre films, as well as art house films, and like the whole spectrum of films, because they do it in a different language. So,
Yeah.
It's like, is this Hollywood film? No, because people are speaking French.
Yeah.
No. What? Excusez-moi. No. But when you're working as a Canadian in English language Canada and you're trying to make films, you're immediately at a disadvantage unless if you want to make genre films. The fact that David Cronenberg is, like, really, when you think about it, our most successful genre filmmaker,
yes,
tells you a lot. So immediately you're at a disadvantage, and that therefore causes people to downplay the work that you do, even people inside the industry. So when I was teaching Canadian film history, I had to deal with the fact that there wasn't one textbook that I thought was particularly good. All the textbooks had, like, good sections in them, but then you'd have this other stuff which, just made it sound incredibly boring and incredibly dry, or you would find it very difficult to, because it wasn't so much that people were just recording things objectively. Everything was subjective. Everything was like, well, let me tell you about the Canadian tax shelter era, when this bunch of assholes made terrible, terrible pseudo Hollywood films and ruined it for the rest of us. It's like, and I knew those assholes, and I will name them. It's like, everything's like that. It's fascinating. So yeah, I knew that I wanted to talk about a haunted film, and that I wanted to set it against that backdrop. And obviously, I knew a lot about filmmaking, and I knew a lot about Canadian filmmaking, because I had taught Canadian film history, and because I covered films inside of Canada, and because because I've watched millions and millions of films. But the last part didn't fall into place for a very long time. I tried to write it from you know, the point of view of a complete outsider at one point, like a guy who was a journalist who was not involved with the Canadian film industry, and in fact would be the person going, the Canadian film industry, I don't know much about that, even though I myself am Canadian.
And then basically start writing why didn't you couldn't have bitches be crazy, as they describing the kind of
he was a little bitches be crazy, as I recall. And you know, I tried to write it from Safi's point of view, the point of view of the ex-student that Lois ends up, you know, hiring to help her with her investigations. I tried to write it from, I think I tried to write it from Lois's husband's point of view at one point, you know, and every
point of view except the character who was most like yourself, basically.
Exactly, because there was some part of me that was like, no, you can't do that. You absolutely can't do that.
Too close,
the easiest thing to do, but the easiest thing to do, but also the most self-exposing thing to do, right? So, you know, that I think was what was, you know, holding me back. And then I remember I had like almost like a breakdown about it, and you know, and the next, and I remember saying to my friends at the time, you know, it's like, I just feel like if I can't crack this, oh man, I know I've written all these other things, but I feel like if I can't crack this, I'll just be useless. It'll be like I've been writing about other people's dreams for years, you know, and never creating anything lasting of my own. And then the next morning I woke up and I went, A, that's a really good line, and B, that's how that works. She's you. Lois is you.
Yeah.
You have to fucking give her, you have to say, okay, Lois is the version of me that never was a horror writer, you know, as well as being all the other things that I was. You know, she is the person that in the worst place, you know, the person that I was when I didn't know if my son loved me, the person that I was when I was super, super depressed, the person that I was when I was, you know, like at my worst at like 3 o'clock in the morning, you know, on a really, really bad day. That's
in a very bad place. I mean, that's one of the things that really struck me about that book is it's very, at times it's painfully honest.
And my mom's not a bad parent. My mom's not a bad mom. She's a really great mom, you know, but she's a human being and I'm a human being, and you know, it's like she, you know, she had her shit, and me too, you know, and we went through some stuff. At any rate, so yeah, once I made that decision to, you know, to not let myself off the hook and to go, okay, all right, go the Oprah book route, but everything else is horror. The great part is that the Oprah book stuff makes the horror better. It makes it so much better.
I mean, I often found in some of this, it's like, I don't think I could write an Oprah book as such. I couldn't sit down and write, I'm going to write my Oprah book kind of thing. But, you know, give me something else to use as a jumping off point. Give me some weird premise, some creepy shit to write about. And, you know, with that as a kind of, as a lever, as a fulcrum, as a vantage point, I can, it'll dredge up all this other stuff. You know, I'll end up writing about stuff that actually, you know, is about me, even if it's not always necessarily apparent on the surface. Like I say, a lot of the time, I mean, I think I still seem to be in the phase of largely writing characters who tend to be quite different from me. But now and again, but a lot of other times, I kind of think, no, all these characters are just either versions of me or Mary, or kind of Mary Sue versions of me.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly. You know,
I often write characters who've got the kind of qualities I would like to think I really wish I would love to have. I would like to have in certain situations. I mean, I know that, you know, in a shit hit the fan sort of situation, we all like to think we would be the person who's like, okay, everybody stay calm, we'll get out of this, and I will just go and kick the shit out of these werewolves or whatever. But I'm far more likely to be one who's like who's like blubbering under a table, or who does something incredibly stupid out of sheer panic that gets everybody killed, or gets bitten by the werewolf and desperately tries to hide it before, you know, yeah.
I used to have this obsession with characters who had glasses. And I think the last time that I you know, like characters in movies or, you know, whatever. For example, I developed this theory that Cassius from Julius Caesar probably needed glasses because he says my sight was ever thick, and he has to get his slave to tell him what's going on the other end of the battlefield, and his slave lies to him, and he ends up killing himself. But I think the last time I did that was when I was watching, The Walking Dead, and I spent a while going, oh yeah, nobody has glasses because all the people who had glasses died in like the first.
I mean, that's the thing to me, because I have glasses, and without the specs, I'm as blind as a bat.
Oh yeah.
If anything, in the event of some big disaster, if I lost those, I would be fucked. I would be absolutely fucked. I wouldn't last a week without a responsible adult, at least, to help me around. I mean, you get into that kind of. I mean, it's.
I can see about a foot.
Yeah.
You know, and it's getting worse. It gets worse every day, and you know, and so sometimes I would fixate on a character like, for example, the governor's sidekick, whose name I can't remember. It began with an M. Milton. Yeah, Milton, who did have glasses, and I was like, that's why you ended up hanging around with the governor. Because you have glasses and you know that he's likely to make sure that you don't lose your glasses and die.
I mean, I've often kind of toyed with the idea of writing a kind of, you know, because I mean, I've often been haunted by the vision of, you know, sort of like some form of terrible social collapse, you know, coming in the near future, be it climate catastrophe, you know, global war, civil breakdown, whatever, and always this thing, you know, in the kind of Darwinian sort of society that people, you know, we used to sort of visualizing through, you know, to kind of the Mad Max kind of movies. It's like I would have the life expectancy of, you know, a snowball on a hot plate, basically. But you know, I'm kind of like, you know, my mind's kind of evolving defense mechanisms against this awful horror. I think, well, you know, you could be the cook, maybe, you know, you can make a decent stir fry, or you know, you could be like the storyteller. You could be, you know, when everyone's like huddled on the hillside looking at the smouldering ruins of the city below, and you know, the night is dark and cold and endless around them, and as bleak and vast and unknowable as the future. You know, here's this tubby little fucker who can tell a story that makes people laugh, or gives them a pleasant kind of pleasing Jamesian kind of terror, or something that takes their mind off it, and suddenly, you know, you've got a skill that's actually valuable and can keep you alive. And I've always meant to do something with this idea, not least because you could weave so many other narratives into it, like a kind of Decameron, or 1001 Nights kind of thing.
Well, I've always loved that scene in Reign of Fire, the dragon movie, where Christian Bale and his best friend are doing performing a version of Star Wars for these kids. You know, it's like, but you see, Luke, you do not know that I am your father. And the kids are like, oh my God. Fight me now. No.
I mean, character is so important in terms of, I think a lot of the time when I've struggled to write anything, a lot of it's been finding the right kind of voice or the right point of view, the right person to actually tell that story. And sometimes it is, just a case of just keep it simple and just go with, sort of a very, or sometimes start writing the story and you'll find out who the person telling it is.
Yeah, exactly. But it's true that voice, that thing of voice. My parents are both actors, as you know, and so I grew up around actors, seeing a lot of theatrical stuff, listening to them take each other on their lines, going through scripts that they were acting in at the time, and I became very, very aware of, like one of the earliest things that I saw them in was Under Milkwood, by Dylan Thomas, and so I became very aware early on, and and they also used to read things like Twelfth Night to me when I was a kid. It's like, yep, mom's gonna be in this, so let's just read through this. It's like, well, this is weird, and people are talking really strangely, but at the same time, I'm really getting it. It's coming across, and so that idea of learning people's voices, that people can speak in a very, very different way from you, and yet you can, if you listen carefully to them, sort of learn their language and learn how to interpret it, and then you're listening to somebody tell you an amazing story. But secondarily, there's that whole idea of a monologue, and a monologue is like a snippet of somebody telling you a story, somebody that you do not know, and you have to learn everything about them through this story that they're telling. It's one of the reasons that I like first person. I remember I was reading Caitlin R. Kernan's blog back when she was on LiveJournal, and she used to talk about how difficult she found first person, and because it sounded fake to her, and it was very much that thing of, this person could be presenting themselves in any way. You have no idea if this is true or not. And I was like, no, but that's what's so great about first person narrative is that, yes, they are absolutely presenting themselves the way that they want to present themselves, but stuff is going to come through, which is going to tell you if they're lying or if they're not lying. Stuff is going to come through, which is going to,
exactly. It's getting the buggers to actually, once you can actually get some sense of them as the characters as actually being people, as opposed to just these figures you're moving around, then a lot of the work's done for you. You just kind of let them do the thing, kind of thing. And
absolutely. And in a weird way, you wanted to talk about each thing I show you is a piece of my death.
Yeah, because there's
and
really
how that came together as a found footage narrative, which it absolutely is.
Because it's actually a collaborative piece, isn't it? With you and your
that's right.
And Steve.
Between me and my husband, Stephen J. Berenger, who shows up in experimental film as Simon. Yes. the guy that everybody says is the guy that some dumb guys have said is what is it, whipped because he doesn't leave me. That was, and by the way, that was absolutely an actual choice from my point of view, because every time you read something about a married couple with an autistic child, where things aren't super easy, 9 times out of 10 the dude takes off, and A, that wasn't true, and B, I didn't want to make it true either.
Damn right. Why should you?
Yeah, exactly. The weird part is that because my husband is a Catholic, He is more likely to believe me if I say something like, so an ancient goddess has, has turned her horrible eyes on me.
Oh, you too. I thought it was just me this week.
Yeah. All right. It's like, I've got some ideas. No, we're not going to a priest. It's like, okay, but at any rate, so yeah, with each thing, I started out with two characters who were going to introduce themselves as collaborative experimental filmmakers. And they were based on two people that in the experimental filmmaking, world of Toronto that I had interviewed at one time or another. And
experimental film.
Soraya Moosh is one of them, and she shows up in experimental film at one point. Safi is sorry, the woman who doesn't do film anymore.
Yes, exactly. I'll be fine.
Just like, no. yeah. Safi was like working with her on an art piece, which is entirely about auditory stuff. So yeah, and the other one being Max Holborn. And so I was like, both of these people were really interesting people to talk to. I know enough about them to be able to, sort of cobble versions of them together. And wouldn't it be interesting if they were friends and they worked together, sort of like RRR. which is in a lot of ways like the Indian version of if Sean Brown and Nate Turner had worked together, maybe both of them wouldn't have ended up dying, and they would have freed a lot more slaves. Yeah. So started with that. Alec Christian, who is the person who writes the no, he doesn't write it, but he's mentioned in the part at the beginning where the guy's writing about the background man phenomenon. Is also based on a person that I knew in Toronto. And Alec Christian later shows up in experimental film again. He runs the website that Lois is writing for at the beginning. I thought of the dude who writes that article as being sort of like me in my, I'm writing an article about something interesting in the film scene mode. And everything else, the places where Steve came in most clearly were in doing all the research that I sometimes don't do particularly well. Things like, okay, so if you're recording a police interview, how is that laid out? If you are if you are talking about stuff that you found in an evidence locker, how is that laid out? If there a forensic report, how do you lay that out? Stuff like that. And we did some back and forth stuff, which is always useful. But essentially, it all came out of knowing that I could talk persuasively about things that most people probably didn't know much about. And that is where I find that characters come from for me. And sometimes it's something as ostensibly simple as, let me tell you a story about how I ended up, running 2 Airbnbs and some of the dumb shit that happened to me during that time period. And sometimes it's something a little more complicated, like, what is experimental filmmaking? What is an exquisite corpse? How would you put one together over the internet? Luckily, a couple of people already had put together an exquisite corpse made of other people's footage, being sort of, stuck together haphazardly over the internet. And so I was able to move outwards from that, and then. But I've, I think you can absolutely say that the idea of the background man is like a not quite a first run at Lady Midday, but sort of a first run at Lady Midday, because it takes off from that old idea of whatever you do in front of a camera is imbued with magical power.
Yeah.
And that old idea that comes from stories about the first filmmaking and episodes and the first film showing episodes, things like the people who saw the train coming in and thought that it was going to come through the window, through the wall. It's like, is that really true? But it's a great story.
Yes.
Yeah. So stuff like that. Other than that, just, remembering those three things, right? Provenance and presentation and liminality.
And at that point, we're going to take a short break here, i.e. for a week, because we recorded nearly 2 hours worth of this stuff, and we figured that was kind of a little bit too much to expect anyone to have to sit through in one go. So we're going to cut it there, and we'll be back next week with even more of this stuff. If you can bear it.
So we hope you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please hit the like and share buttons. You can find us on YouTube, Stitcher, Anchor, SoundCloud, and Spotify.
And if you want to support the podcast, you can make a one-off donation over at our Ko-Fi page or subscribe to our Patreon for access to exclusive content.
And to get the heads up on what's coming next, find us on Twitter or check out our website at https://nodarknessbutours.wixsite.com/podcast.
There we go. I really am going to have to figure out a more a snappier name for our website, I think. But until then, anyway, we will see you next week. And until then, I have been Simon Bestwick.
And I, as usual, am Gemma Files.
And this, of course, has been and remains
No darkness but ours. Whoa.